Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Dr. Stephen Shipp. He is headmaster at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana. You can find more at sevenoaksclassical.org. Dr. Shipp, thanks so much for joining us.
Scott, it's good to be with you.
Talking today about the portrait of a graduate, something you've been working on for Seven Oaks, this portrait of a graduate. So how would you define what you're trying to achieve, and why did you set out to write one?
I think what we're trying to do with the portrait of a graduate is something that has kind of been catching on as the sort of thing that a school should consider writing, and I think for good reason. So in one sense, it's something that people are coming to expect. But I wanted to embrace the task of writing a portrait of a graduate because I really saw it as another way to articulate the mission of the school and to provide another kind of anchor in that sense, or a kind of North Star. And it's the sort of document that has the opportunity to really showcase ways in which your school might be distinct. So when we talk about a portrait of a graduate, for us, and I think for a number of schools, you're talking about a document that's probably one page, maybe two in length. Often what you'll find is some headers with some narrative text or bullet points underneath that just, in fairly brief, succinct form, give you a picture of the sort of person that you're hoping your school helps to produce.
Now, most schools have some kind of mission statement, as you alluded to earlier. How would you describe the relationship between the mission of a school and what might be its portrait of a graduate?
Yeah, that's a good question, because they're doing, in some ways, they're doing some similar things. I think the mission is rightly regarded as a kind of bedrock. It is a starting point of an organization. It's the initial focal point that provides a reason for being of, in our case, a school. It really kind of, in the context of a school, describes what the education is intending to do, especially while students are under your care. So our mission statement talks about training minds and improving hearts through the kind of education we offer. And that education includes instruction, not only in academic subjects, but in principles of moral character and civic virtue. The portrait kind of extends the field of vision. You look beyond the time that the students are under your care, and you're trying to think about what is the long-term effect that you hope the education has in the lives of your students. But the mission's still, in a very real way, central. So for us, our portrait of a graduate fits on a page, and right under the title, Portrait of a Graduate, is the mission of the school, because we think that ought to inform and be intimately connected with the kind of effects that we hope that the education has over the course of students' lives.
So who is the portrait of a graduate for? Is it for administrators, for teachers, for students, for parents? Who's the target audience?
Yeah, I think that also is a very good question, and I think the answer is all of the above. There's both an internal and an external audience. Just as is true with the mission statement, we want for people who are considering the school, this is one of those documents that marks out what kind of school we're trying to be, what it is we're trying to accomplish. And so it's useful for people who might be looking at the school for the first time. But it's also something that we want to be a living document internally. It is again a kind of anchor. It's a kind of succinct summary of what we're trying to accomplish. And in that sense, it's something that is going to be of great interest to teachers who are already attracted to the school because of its mission. And it's the sort of thing that we want to introduce our students to. So we want to hold up a vision of the sort of people we see ourselves as helping them become.
Was there any particular moment or a particular problem that arose that pushed you to take on this project of writing the portrait of a graduate?
Yeah, I really started to think a lot more seriously about this project as the school grew. So we started kindergarten through 8th grade back in 2016, and then we added a grade each year. So as the high school grew, as we approached our graduating class, that really was pushing me to sort of think about life beyond Seven Oaks. And now we're in our 9th year, and we're getting to the point where we're not very many years away from having students who may have been here all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. And so it feels like a time that's ripe for trying to give articulation to what it is we hope, what kind of lasting mark we hope the education will leave. I mean, really, in some level, we do have students for a lot of time. It's a remarkable thing that we have approximately 180 days with students for up to 13 years. On the other hand, we are just offering a foundational education, and we hope that this is just one early formative but early season of a student's life that goes on long beyond their time at Seven Oaks. But we want to think as we look back on what the school did, what it offered to students. We want to be able to say, what is that? But it really is the growth of the school and this approach of a time when students could have gone their entire foundational education here that kind of pushed me to take on this project.
What was your starting point? Where did you begin with crafting this portrait of a graduate?
Yeah, I think there's different ways of approaching this question of a starting point. I think there are some very early decisions someone writing a portrait of a graduate has to make. One of them is, what is it that you're writing? Are you writing a description of your graduates as most of them actually are, most years? Or are you trying to kind of paint more of an ideal? We try to paint more of an ideal. Now, at the same time, I should say we recognize that we're just one institution among others. A school can do its work really well and for a variety of reasons fail to make an impact on a student. Or we may do our work poorly and students come out and flourish. We also think that the ultimate test of a portrait of a graduate is going to be the ultimate test for what kind of lives students live. It's just that, it's the life lived. And so we thought it would be most useful to stick with something more aspirational. I think I used the image before of a kind of North Star or a guiding light that sort of marks out what we hope to see people moving toward, and to then contribute in the ways that we can as a school, as one institution among others. Maybe a little bit more practically, I think as I started to play with this idea of a portrait of a graduate, it seemed like one of the first decisions to make is your basic categories. And I think we kicked around a number of possibilities. And people in education hear all kinds of categories that you can imagine being employed. College and career, critical thinking and lifelong learning, head, heart, hands, good, true, beautiful. There's a lot of directions you can go. ultimately for us, well, again, we came back to the mission, and with our mission statement talking about training minds and improving hearts, and ending in with a reference to moral character and civic virtue. I think a really good summary of our mission ends up being those categories of moral and intellectual and civic virtue. And so those ended up being the categories that we worked with for the Portrait of a Graduate, again, following our mission.
You mentioned that school's now been around for, almost a decade at this point. Have you found it difficult, or how have you managed the hurdles with staying true to something like your mission statement, this Portrait of a Graduate, as you add classes, as the school expands? Where have you found challenges, perhaps, in staying true to what Seven Oaks is?
When I think about how you stay true to the mission, it's what I ultimately come back to is there have to be keepers of the vision. In the case of Seven Oaks, I think it has been a benefit that there's been a continuity in leadership since the school was founded. I think that then plays into hiring, where you're constantly looking for people who are going to work for the school as faculty or staff who are actually attracted to the mission of the school. And I also think there's a place for thinking about different ways of setting the mission and vision in front of people, and sometimes in fresh ways. So sometimes this looks, again, just it can take a programmatic form. If you were to attend our grammar school morning assembly on a Monday, that would be Mission Monday, and a student in the assembly would lead K through 5 in the recitation of the school's mission. That's great. But it can find its way. There are other ways you can hold it in front of different constituencies in the school. So I think there's a tight connection between the mission and the way we crafted a code of ethics for teachers, or the way we evaluate teachers. And I think, again, to come back to the Portrait of a Graduate, one of the benefits of the Portrait of a Graduate is that it is another way of articulating or giving expression to that same mission. And I think having additional, or in this case, a fresh way to express that same mission is part of what helps us keep our vision clear.
So as you've gone down this path of writing and working on Portrait of a Graduate for Seven Oaks, is there anything that you recommend avoiding? How can people learn from your potential mistakes?
Okay, well, I think I suppose that I do have a couple pieces of advice here. I mean, I think as we fleshed out our own vision of a graduate, we moved beyond categories. We found that with some of our major categories, we had subcategories that kind of made for natural groupings of things we wanted to talk about. So like with intellectual virtue, there were points that seemed to relate more to knowledge or skills or characteristics. Or another way of thinking about things is some of the points we wanted to get across seem to have more to do with ideas and some to do more with points of practice. And I think it's good to have a mix of all of those things. You wouldn't want to just talk about the knowledge you're going to convey or just about the skills you're going to equip students with. You want to talk about character, I think, as well. I think another potential hazard in the world we live in is being tempted to feel like you have to quantify in a Portrait of a Graduate your success. You know, it's called a Portrait of a Graduate. I think most of us would look at like a paint by numbers sort of work of art and say, well, that's probably not great art. It lacks nuance, it lacks richness, it lacks texture. In the same way, I think you want to be careful not to over quantify the kind of outcomes that you want. I also think you want to kind of avoid any kind of Procrustean bed. You know, I think sometimes what you find in classical ed circles is you'll find people who talk a lot about college prep to the point where it starts to sound like if a child doesn't go to college following high school, that somehow they're less fully successful than the student who does. Or you sometimes hear this, some schools kind of talk so much about preparing the leaders of tomorrow. If you don't quickly find yourself in some sort of executive role, in business or government, again, students left to wonder, have I succeeded?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you want to find ways to paint a portrait that on the one hand is painting a picture of a kind of ideal, but in another way is actually potentially attainable by virtually anyone.
Talking with Dr. Stephen Shipp, headmaster at Seven Oaks Classical School, about the portrait of a graduate. Do you have any suggestions for crafting a portrait of a graduate that is specific to your institution, one that perhaps only applies to Seven Oaks and not another very good classical K-12 school? How do you make sure it is your own?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I can say that there's something that we would say in a portrait of a graduate that no other school would say. But I don't think that's the nature of this document. I think good schools should be attempting to do essentially the same thing. And so I would hope that there are many schools that could paint a portrait very similar to the one that we paint. I think there'll be some differences in detail. I don't know that every school would use the same categories as we did, the intellectual, moral, and civic virtue. And I'm sure in some of the points they might express this or that point a little bit differently. But I think most classical schools are going to be painting with the same set of colors. They're going to be painting with a similar palette. It doesn't mean the final product is going to look identical, but I would actually hope that there was more similarity than difference.
Any places thus far you found your portrait of a graduate particularly useful for Seven Oaks?
Yeah, it's a gift that just keeps on giving. Already as we've been working through drafting a portrait of a graduate, it then becomes part of your giving expression to the thoughts that are contained in the portrait. Proves helpful in things like we have what we call a Founders Award, which is a kind of top award we give to the student who most fully embodies the mission of the school. But now, as we're equipped with a portrait of a graduate, we have more than ever fleshed out a picture of the kind of person who really would, we think, embody the mission of the school. And so that provides something that provides a kind of lens through which teachers can look as they nominate students for the Founders Award. It also, as an administrator, again, it helps clarify some thoughts so that as I coach teachers or as we approach the end of year teacher evaluations, is there what sort of teachers, we can ask ourselves, are being most successful in helping draw students toward the sort of people that we want to foster, to cultivate, to form. And I think there's just a way that going through the process of writing a portrait and having a document like this, I think it just helps focus the mind and draw us back to basic questions about what school is for, what high school is for, how to gauge if we're doing well. And so just that kind of refocusing by recurring to first principles, I think is just an incredibly fruitful exercise.
Dr. Stephen Shipp is headmaster at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana. You can find more at sevenoaksclassical.org as we talk today about the portrait of a graduate. Dr. Shipp, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks, Scott. Good conversation.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. That's Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.